Welcome back to the Doing Motherhood podcast, where we talk all things Black mothers today. All right, what's the goings on, y'all? The summertime is just a really kind of chill time for me. So on the work front, the last baby for about a month was born on Monday, and that was an amazing experience. So now I'll catch a small break from births anyway. I'm still working, but I'll catch a small break from births, which really gives me a chance to kind of dig into some projects that I've been working on and now can kind of get into the nitty gritty. So I'm working on projects like this podcast. There's some expansion that's happening here that I'm excited about. And another really big project that I'm going to be announcing this fall. So I'm super excited about that. Can't wait to let you all in on what that is. So it's coming soon. Stay tuned. Don't go nowhere so you can see what's going on. Also with the podcast, soon we'll start having guests join us. And I have some guest invites going out to some really exceptional and Black mothers who are doing the work to help their communities. And that's really what I want to share mostly on this podcast, is hearing stories from other Black mothers who are holding down the home front, taking care of their kids, but also doing the work to make an impact for other Black mothers and families in their community. So stay tuned because that's coming soon. And I have some guests that I can't wait for y'all to meet. So that's coming up. And also, if you have a platform or you have a topic that centers Black mothers or, would be helpful to Black mothers, reach out. Let me know. I'd love to have you on as a guest, or if you know someone who has a good story to share with our community, I am open to hearing who it is that you have in mind and would love to have them on the show. So we want to share stories in space with Black mothers who are impacting, teaching, guiding, and building. They are doing motherhood in a way that is for us, by us. And if that's you or you have someone that you would like to suggest as a guest, please email doingmotherhood@anyadoula.com. That's our podcast email. On the personal front, so in the summertime, typically, as most of us do, I tend to slow down. And this summer, I am being very intentional about being slow and just kind of giving myself a lot of time for rest and relaxation. Last summer we know where we were last summer. We were in the midst of coronavirus. At this time, we were still in what I often refer to as a social uprising or a racial uprising, which both are still going, right? This summer, by the way. Not that either of those things have ended, but it doesn't feel as intense, right? We've been here for a year and a half now with coronavirus. And for Black folks, racism in America is just what it is, right? I've decided to stop pretending like this is all new to us. It's not new to us. But either way, last summer was just filled with a lot of angst and anxiety. And so I never really got that chance to kind of relax into a summertime mode. I was still definitely working on survival mode and like, how do we not catch this virus? And how do I take care of families without exposing them or myself and my family? So this summer, I'm just chilling. I have been hiding out in my house, which is funny because I thought for sure that once I got the vaccine that I would want to be out and about. But getting out and about, you realize that everybody else is truly out and about. And so it still doesn't feel as comfortable to me to be out and doing so many things, especially indoor activities like restaurant dining and so forth. So I'm still being cautious, but yeah, so I've been hiding out at my house. My son is gone for the summer now. I've been just couch surfing and watching a lot more television than I have in years, probably more than I should be. But it's definitely, for me in this moment, it's a form of self-care. I'm escaping that ever going cycle of doomsday news and social media. And just kind of, and especially now that we know that there's this variant D with the COVID, with COVID. And so yes, the house still feels safe. The house feels peaceful. And it gives me a moment to not be running around and, doing all of the extra things. So I'm chilling. I'm having a really good time at my house right now. Yeah, so I'm having a really good time at home, getting into television as a form of self-care. Also just finding the things that I really like to do again. So, this summer, I'm really intent on going to all of the museums on the free museum pass that they have, which I think for most of the museums in Houston, Thursdays is the free day. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm getting into. I just really want to encourage Black women to think about taking significant breaks from social media and the news cycles. I was, a few weeks ago, just kind of like at the house and thumbing through all the social medias and realizing how in just a matter of moments, anxious I started to feel. And it just isn't a good feeling when that's what when you're like bombarding yourself. One of the things I thought about was just that like we're not supposed to have, as human beings, this is a very new concept that we are getting so much information all at one time at our, at our hands, at our fingertips. We're in control of how much information we're taking in. And it's information that we otherwise don't really have necessity for. Is that what I'm trying to say? That we don't really have a need to take in so much information all at one time. And so when you think about those days where you're just kind of having those off feelings, or you're in a mood, but you can't really contribute that mood to like one thing that's definitely happening in your day to day, or you can't contribute, the anxious feelings or just this angst, and there's nothing happening in your like real world day-to-day living life. Not that I don't think social media is real, because it's an extension of us. But what I'm saying is when we take the time to unplug and look up from our phones and, put them away for at least a few hours a day, you'll realize that that sometimes that angst and anxiety is coming from the bombardment of information that is happening in those places. So I just want to give us that reminder, a little self-care reminder. Unplug sometimes. You don't have to take in, everything. I promise you, if you unplug even for a week, when you come back the next week, the same story's going to be running. It's always the same stories running. So you're not going to miss out on a whole lot to like unplug for a few hours or even a few days at a time. Be very intentional about the time that you're spending on news and social media. Curate your timelines so that you have less of these like breaking news and negative newsy accounts, more of the uplifting accounts, helpful accounts, things that are helping you tackle some of the tough things that you might be going. And it doesn't even have to be tough stuff, right? Like house hacks are great. Cat videos can be great sometimes, right? But just doing stuff that brings you joy and not only getting all of the doomsday news. So yeah, I'm curious to know, what does the summer look like for you and your family? Is it business as usual? Are you traveling? Are you just taking a load off and kind of kicking it around the house? Are you visiting with family? What are your plans? I'd love to discuss it over on the Doing Motherhood IG page. You can reach us there at doing_motherhood_podcast on Instagram. So we're gonna move on into the main segment for today, which I'll be talking about my day job, which is, I love to talk about that more than I talk about anything else. So I'm excited to talk about that. But before we move into our main segment, I just want to ask that if you are enjoying the Doing Motherhood podcast, that you subscribe, like, share, and review our episodes. Let people know that we're here. Let them know what you like about the podcast. I see the numbers going up, so thank you to those of you who are sharing and spreading the word. I appreciate you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to more content for you all. And like I said before, I want this show or this podcast, I want this to be an interactive discussion. You know, I would like for this to work two ways, so that it's a two-way conversation. So join us on Instagram, and I'll be looking for more ways to make our conversations a lot more intimate. So in our main segment today, we are talking about my love, the work that I do. So if you have been here, you likely came from my day job, which is, I think of my Instagram page as like my day job right now. So I work as a doula, which is an out-of-hospital birth worker, or is traditionally known to be an out-of-hospital birth worker. So today, the title of our segment is What the Doula. I want to get down and into the nitty gritty. And when I say into the nitty gritty, I mean, we're getting past all the surface stuff. Like, if you've come from my doula page, I expect that you already know that. And if you're not here from my doula page, I'm going to give you a little bit of information that you can take and run with, so that you can go and do all your Googling and get a little more in-depth information about the work that doulas do. But I want to get into the actual work that doulas are doing with families, because it's really important, especially for Black women. Y'all hear me say that all the time, but it's really important, especially for Black women, that we understand how much more important, and dare I even say crucial, it is for us, the role that doulas are playing in our lives in this moment that we're in a maternal health crisis. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let me just kind of pull back a minute and then we'll jump into it. So I have been doing this work for 3 years. June made my 3rd year working as a doula, and it's just been such a period of like very fast growth, a lot of growth, pretty fast. This past Monday, as I said, my 76th doula baby was born, right? So that means that's 76 families in the 3 years that I've been doing this work that I have assisted. And when I say assist, I definitely attend their births, and I have a physical presence that helps them out. But I tell people, if your doula is a really good doula, the bulk of the work is happening prior to you going into labor. And so I love this work. I love this work in a way that I've not loved doing anything else, even my nursing career, which I loved. So this, what I do now sets a really high bar. So today I'm going to skip the Doula 101 stuff. But just to give a little bit of tidbits so that those of you who are not very familiar, you can use this information to go and get some deeper knowledge about it. So doulas are not midwives. A lot of times people have this idea that a doula is the same as a midwife, or that we work we do often work alongside midwives, but we also work alongside medical providers inside of hospital spaces. So we're working alongside your doctors and your nurses for those people who are choosing to give birth at a hospital. Doulas are a support role, so we're not a medical role. Your doctor, your midwife, the nurses that work with you in hospital spaces, they perform medical roles. Doulas provide a support role. So we provide informational, emotional, physical, and spiritual support to families during the perinatal year, meaning we come in early in the pregnancy so that our families are getting the education and knowledge they need. I tell my families all the time, I'm helping you with the information you need to be an active participant in your care plan. And that way, what's happening to your pregnancy is not just happening to you, but you are a participant, right, to what's going on in your care plan. We're not only for natural births. I think that's one of the biggest myths that people have about doulas. They think, well, oh, if I have a doula, that means I have to have my baby at home or at a birth center. And I'm not about that life. And that is fair. Right? That is absolutely fair. But doulas provide so many different roles. I personally work more in hospitals because of my medical background, right? So usually the families who find me are looking for me because they know they prefer a hospital birth, and or they might have some medical conditions that make their plan a little bit different. And so I work with them to understand that, so that they really, the idea is so that people don't get caught off guard, so that they understand the process, they understand what's happening to themselves physically with their body in the pregnancy, that they understand the system that they're walking into, have an understanding of the procedures and pretty much how, like, the inner workings of that system, so that they can so that you have choices, really, that you understand what your options are, what your choices are, and you can make the best decision for yourself. So that's our Doula one-on-one. I trust that you are going to go further and dig in and find more information. But for today's discussion, I really want to focus on why doulas are especially important for Black families. Hiring a doula is not a luxury for us. That's one of the things that one of my families shared. We had a meetup over the weekend, and they were saying that one of my clients was saying that her mother was thinking that this was like a, ooh la la, you're so fancy. And she had to tell her mother, Mommy, no, this is not about being fancy. This is about me, like, making sure that I come out of this okay and healthy and safe. And so I think that in the face of what this nation is seeing in a maternal health crisis, that for Black women, we need to make sure we're looking at it from that standpoint, that we're looking at this as less so fancy and more, how am I being responsible for my own healthy outcomes during this big transition in my life. So let's get started, all right? So maternal health crisis. First, I want to just cover the maternal health crisis and give a real basic understanding of what's going on. So the United States is in a maternal health crisis at this moment. How are we in a maternal health crisis? Well, of all the developed nations, so we're talking about most Western nations, the UK, Germany, France, right? The US is last in maternal mortality rates. And so when we say maternal mortality rates, what we're discussing is the amount of women who do not fare well. And when I say do not fare well, I try everything not to say the fatalities that occur because of complications of childbirth. Or in the prenatal and postpartum period. So the US is dead last, meaning all these other countries are doing a lot better job at keeping women safe and healthy during their pregnancies. An issue with that, I mean, so aside from the obvious issue that people are not being kept as safe in this country, is also the fact that the US has the most expensive healthcare. And so we're paying a lot of money and not being offered as great quality service as we should be right now. So that's across the board for all women, everybody. What we're seeing though is, and so the reason that this is happening, why are we in this crisis? Well, most of it is due to an increase in interventions, right? So when we talk about the difference between a medical birth and an out-of-hospital birth, which a lot of people tend to think of as a birth with a doctor versus a birth with a midwife at a birth center or at home, is that in medical spaces, pregnancy is seen as a problem. Problem is how in medical spaces, we define anything that takes the body out of a normal state, right? So any disease process, any type of illness, any type of injury is seen as a problem. And so when people are pregnant, even though we know that pregnancy is a normal, healthy life process, in medical establishments, their approach is to see this as a problem and things need to be treated. And so that is where these interventions come into play. And so it's really kind of a domino effect of we're doing all of these things that we were not normally doing during pregnancy or doing during labor. We're doing all this extra stuff that eventually leads to a rise in C-sections. And so as we've seen both of these curves trend upwards, that's where we've seen women not be as safe. And so they're either being injured during childbirth or some women are not making it through childbirth. And so again, that's across the board for everybody. But then when we look at what's happening for Black women in the midst of this crisis, we know that Black women are 3 times more at risk of dying from complications during pregnancy or childbirth than their white counterparts. And for a long time, for a very long time, we've attributed that disparity for Black women to lack of access, lack of education, not having prenatal education, having poor health to begin with prior to pregnancy. Anyway, and so these were factors that were just accepted as kind of the norm. Like, well, Black women don't fare well because they're not as educated. And if they're not as educated, they don't know to go get prenatal care. And if they're not getting prenatal care, then they're probably not healthy. And it's low-key they did it to themselves, right? They would never say that out loud, but it's a low-key, they're doing it to themselves. And so for decades, that is how this problem has been approached. And what we've seen in the last 3 to 5 years is that conversation has changed now that new data is out to show that those disparities, so the fact that Black women are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of their white counterparts in pregnancy and childbirth, is due solely to racism. Because when we account for those factors, education, right? So now when we look at these numbers, we know that Black women are just as, if not, well, Black women are the most educated group in the US at this time, right? So when we look at the difference between Black women who are at least college educated against a white woman who has a high school education, that white woman still has a much better chance at surviving pregnancy and childbirth than this more educated Black woman. When we account for wealth, when we account for education, when we account for women who are completely healthy, that even still, even when we account for all of that, those disparities are still really high. And now that they have, now that we have this data that shows that it's because of racism that this happens, the conversation has changed. And so now we see people reacting to this differently. And that's where doulas come in the conversation that we're having today, why doulas are helping out. So one other thing that I want to point out about this maternal health crisis is that these numbers, those statistics that I'm talking about, are focused on hospital systems, births that occur in hospitals. This is not about births that happen with midwives or out of hospitals. This is solely what is going on in the US healthcare system, that they are not keeping women safe. And especially when for decades, the push was that the hospital is the safest place for people to give birth. And so at this point, we still have about 97 or 98% of births that are happening in hospitals. So how do we keep these Black families safe? Okay, so now we have an understanding of what the maternal health crisis is right now, what that maternal health crisis looks like for Black women. And now I want to just talk about how doulas enter the equation and how we are helpful to families navigating this maternal health crisis. So I personally think of myself when I'm working as a doula, I think of myself as a pregnancy consultant or a healthcare consultant for my families. And the reason that I approach the work from that standpoint is because absolutely families, young women, everyone who's pregnant needs to understand the process of birth process of pregnancy and birth that their body's going through. And so that's very important, and all of that education happens. But a lot of times, most Americans are just not very well-versed healthcare consumers. And that is not anyone's individual fault, but our society tends to, when we teach about healthcare, when we talk to people about healthcare, we rely very heavily on the information that comes from healthcare providers as trusted sources, but I think we lean heavier to see them as authority figures than we probably should be. And so we're taught to kind of just pass all or to delegate all responsibility to the healthcare team, and they've got us and they're going to take care of us, and we shouldn't have to worry about anything. And I am here to tell you that I wish it worked like that, but it does not. That's the bottom line truth. Like, the last thing you want to do is hand all of your healthcare responsibilities completely over to one sole person or this entity, right? Because what we have to understand about the healthcare system in the United States of America is that at the end of the day, it is a business. These are corporations. And just like in any other business or corporation, the bottom line is what matters most at the end of the day. And so what we see is that these healthcare systems, to protect themselves, right, from liability, they have to put in policies and procedures and what they determine to be best practices as a way to ensure that the general population who might be coming into their facility for care and treatment, that they are protecting everyone in that. The issue is that you are not everyone. You are one person. You and your family unit fit somewhere in this broader range of what's normal or what's appropriate. And so you don't want to hand all of that power over to people who work for organizations that are focused on bottom line. I'll just kind of leave it as that. So how does the doula help out in this? Your doula knows the players. So if you have a doula who's experienced enough and has been working in this field for quite some time, she understands the role of the people in the hospital. She understands what your doctor's role is, what it should look like. She understands what your nurse's roles are, what that should look like. They can give you the heads up on who's doing what, right? They also are familiar or should be familiar with medical terminology, especially those doulas who are working specifically in hospital spaces. You know what it's like going to the doctor. You have, your doctor's talking to the nurse and it sounds like a completely different language is happening. And then they turn around and tell you what you need to know in layman's terms, right? And so if a doula is well-versed also in that language, then that person can tell you, give you the heads up of what's happening, right? Help you understand what's taking place. So that you have an advantage in the room as well. And then also they know the landscape. They understand how hospitals that they work at mostly or tend to frequent with their clients, they understand the policies and procedures. They're staying up to date on those things. As an example, the visitor policy during COVID, right? I just know all the doulas in Houston, we were chatting back and forth. Does anybody know if this hospital is open yet? Does anybody know if that hospital is open to doulas again, right? So we're keeping up with what's going on at these hospitals so that we can give you that information. We also have a fundamental understanding of the natural birth process. So again, hospitals, not so much. Your midwives and all of the out-of-hospital birth workers, like they're very well versed in what a natural birth looks like. But often most obstetricians and most L&D nurses, labor and delivery nurses, are only taught what birth looks like from a hospital perspective. And so not to take away from their expertise, right? But having a doula, if your goal is to have a more natural experience or natural outcome, having a doula help you set that goal and help you set a plan to work toward that goal will often tends to get you toward those goals a lot easier because they understand what that process looks like in an environment that's not the most conducive for natural labor. I hope that made sense. And so there's just, when you're working with a doula, there's so much more education. There is definitely more depth and breadth to the education than you would receive if you're solely going by your doctor's visits. The way the system is set up, your doctors really don't get, and this is something I like to vouch for my healthcare professional, my healthcare professional buddies, right? But like the system is set up in a way that doctors don't really have much choice on the time frame that they're able to spend with their patients. So many doctors that I've worked with over the years, as much as their patients gripe and complain, they gripe and complain, the nurses gripe and complain. The system makes it so that these visits are quick, short visits. Your doctor's just kind of checking over what's normal. If everything good, okay, great. This all checks out and you're moving on. But there's not a lot of information or education that you're getting in those visits. And so that's where your doula comes in. That's where you're getting a lot more of the hand holding, right? You have someone who can see you in a more holistic sense, as opposed to like a patient that we've got to take care of and just keep everything healthy, right? We're able to help you kind of navigate through the other things that are related to your pregnancy, not just your health. All right, so moving right along, the last part of this is, how does a doula work with you and your family? So I think one of the things that I often hear from families who come to consultations with me is that like sometimes whoever the birth partner is going to be, if that is a spouse, if that is, a partner, if that is a mother or a mother-in-law or a sister, whoever is going to be the birth person, sometimes they take offense. Sometimes they take offense when the birthing person in their life tells them that they're going to hire a doula. And it's understandable because it's, when you don't understand what our work entails, it is easy to feel that the doula is going to come in to replace the role of the mother or replace the role of that particular client's husband, right? And that is not at all. That is not at all how it works. I often tell my families, I don't see myself as only a doula for, in my case, in my client sample, the women, right? Or the birthing person. I don't see myself as just her doula. I see myself as a doula for this family. And so I expect that whoever's going to be a part of her birth experience is also going to be a part of our visit so that they also have an understanding of what this experience is going to look like and like what this experience looks like when it's good and what this experience looks like when it's bad, right? So the role of the doula is not a role to replace someone. It is a role to bring everyone together so that everyone is on the same plan to make sure that their birthing loved one, their birthing person feels loved, cared for, educated, and that everyone is working to their interest, right? People know what their roles are going to be, so we don't have people stepping on each other's toes. Also, so that people are not doing things that annoy the birthing person, right? So we want to just etch those roles out early ahead of time so everyone knows their role. So that everyone understands how their role provides assistance to the birthing person, and really just helps everyone understand how to be an integral team member on this birthing team for that person. So that's what it looks like. And often one of the things that it always tickles me is that when my clients tell me in the beginning, like, my mom is really not happy with this because she thinks that you're replacing her and she doesn't understand why I won't just let her be the person. But then usually at the hospital, even before the baby is born, at a certain point, her mother will turn to me and say, I really am glad that you're here because now I just get to focus on taking care of my baby. Now I just get to focus on making sure my baby is okay as she's having her baby, right? And because they know that I have a lay of the land. They know that I'm listening out for, what's happening in the room. They see me giving the heads up. They see how I can help in a way that if they were having to do it, they wouldn't be able to just be mom, right, in that moment. And so it lends a depthness to the experience altogether. I think it makes it a lot richer experience for families. And then we also set healthy and realistic expectations, right? So we're able to tell people like, oh, well, you're thinking about not having a hospital birth and having a birth center birth or a home birth. Well, let me give you the real, right? Let me help you understand what this really looks like so that you're not going into this blind or you're not going into this with like a fantasy, because that's what happens for a lot of people. They have a fantasy of what home birth looks like. And we just have to be really real, right? And again, all in the effort to make sure that people have a full, well-rounded understanding so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. That's really what it all comes down to. I'm not there to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. I'm not there to tell people what's right and what's wrong. We're not there to push a certain agenda on people. We're there merely to provide information. I personally, and a lot of doulas, work from an evidence-based, those of us especially who are working primarily at hospitals, we're providing evidence-based information so that people know on both sides what's taking place and they can make the decision that makes the most sense for them and their families. It's also a more relational experience when you have a doula than a transactional experience. I talked about what that, what it looks like and what it feels like when you're going to the doctor, and it's like, you've been waiting for an hour and then you get in here and the doctor's really quick, and it seems sometimes like, why do I even come here? All I did was pee and let them take my weight and listen to the baby, and like, why am I coming here, right? And it is important. That is absolutely important. You need to go to your prenatal exams. I am not telling you that you should not go to your prenatal exam. Go to all of your prenatal exams. But again, the relationship with the doula makes the entire experience a lot more relational experience. I can't tell you the number of conversations that I have with clients that have nothing to do with like just her pregnancy. Like, clients call me when they're trying to figure out the tough conversations, not even with their doctor, but like with their mom, or trying to figure out what she can do to kind of get over some of the blocks, right, that she's having, or some of the fears that she might be facing in her pregnancy experience or her birth experience. So again, so much more of the work is related to who this person is, less about the medical thing that's happening with her body and as her baby grows. So that's that on all of that. I could sit here and talk all day about this, right? But I know we don't have all day to have this conversation. So again, thank you for being here and for tuning in. I want to just remind you one more time, please, if you find the information that is shared here, informational, educational, you just like to hear what we're talking about, please share this podcast with others, help get them tuned in. We are available on all podcasting platforms, and you can also now watch the podcast. So if you prefer to watch your podcast over listening to your podcast, you can now see us on YouTube at Doing Motherhood Podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to this conversation. Come on over to the IG page at Doing_Motherhood_podcast. And let's talk about what you think about doulas. Do you think doulas are important? Do you think it's like, a little bit of luxury, a little bit of lux? Or are you new to the whole idea of it? Come over and let's have a chat.